Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined again by one of my favourites, Mr. Ed Mabry. Hi Ed.
Hey, Colin, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to see you again, and yeah,
Good.
I'm happy and excited to be back on the show with you.
Yeah, and do you know, this again, it's going to be another one of many. This is a series that John and I started, um, and we've done the first episode, and it's on art. Now,
Yes.
art, as I spoke about at the start, I believe it's expression, I believe it's ourself, but it's also how we live as well as what we do and our passion and everything, our truth, all comes into art. Now, John and I are big picture, so
Yeah.
we look at the large picture. So if we wanted a painting, we would look at the whole picture. You being small picture would zoom in to the high definition on the most important parts of those pictures. So obviously you haven't seen our video yet because it's a surprise we've not showed yet. So going off in the back of what you know that we've spoken about, could you zoom into a few parts for us, please, and allow our eyes to be opened?
Sure, I will do my best. So I'm a big fan of art. I love art as well because art tells a story. Art is basically story in big picture, and I love that. Of course, I'm the small picture guy. I will go down to the small picture aspect of it. But so storytelling is a small picture aspect of what art is. So storytelling, we talked about this the last time we were together. So storytelling, stories are the language of eternity. Stories speak to us. They're timeless, and they speak to us that way because our spirits are timeless. They have, to get into the physics of it. Our spirit has no matter, it has no weight, therefore it has no time. It's not affected by mass acceleration or gravity for you Einstein fans out there. So it is the optimal way for human beings to communicate. No matter what society you go to, no matter what time in history you study, cultures always tell stories. That's how they relate to each other. And art, again, is big picture storytelling. And so, just as a review, stories, all the satisfying stories, every satisfying story you've ever heard falls into one of five story tropes or themes. There's the hero's journey, there is the redemption arc, there is the journey of discovery, there is the spiritual awakening, and the tragedy. So if those are the only five stories that affect us, then that would mean that the only types of stories we're going to see in art are those five tropes, those five themes. But the beautiful thing about art is that art is about you. It's about the truth that you bring to the art, and the truth that is expressed through you when you see a great piece of art. Uh, I know that John talked about the audience, that art needs an audience. Art is about the audience. It's not about the artist. It's about what the audience does and what they feel, and what they express. And what they express is themselves. So that's the beauty of art, is that it brings out more of you. And to give you an example, about a year or so ago in 2019, my wife and I, we took a trip to Italy. And and while we were in Italy, we toured the small city of Assisi, which is well known as the birthplace of Saint Francis of Assisi. And we went to the cathedral there. And in the cathedral, there was just the most amazing artwork. Of course, all over Italy, there's fantastic artwork. But in this particular cathedral, all wrapping around the top of the cathedral was the artwork. And of course, it's a cathedral. It was painted in medieval times. So, I'm sorry, in the Renaissance time. So it was about the life of Jesus. That was the entire mural was about that. And we were breathtaking art. And I talked to some of the people in our tour group about it. And I talked to a lady who happened to be a teacher. And I said, what did you think of this? And she said, I think it's just amazing that Jesus started with these humble beginnings, and then he became this great teacher whose his influence is still felt to this day. So she looked at the art and she saw a journey of discovery. I turned to my wife, who is an exhorter, and I said, what did you think of this? And she said, I looked at when he was born, and the angels were singing, and they were saying that, this great Messiah has come to us, but people didn't know who he was. And it took a while for them to see the miracles and walking on water and all the different things that he did. And finally, people understood that this is the Son of God that we've all been waiting for. So she saw a spiritual awakening. I talked to another man in our tour group. He was compassion like you. And he looked at the crucifixion and he said, it's just really a shame that great men are always persecuted by society. Society never accepts people the way that who have greatness. And it's really too bad that he had to die in order to fulfill his mission. So he saw a tragedy. And they asked me what I saw. And I said, well, I see, a child is born in this humble backwater part of the Roman Empire, who grows and learns and becomes this great person. But he has enemies who come after him and they sentence him to death. But then at the end, you have the resurrection. So I saw a hero's journey. All of us, all four of us looked at the same piece of art, but we saw something different in it because it was based on our uniqueness, on who we are. So art brings out who you are uniquely. And depending on what you see and when you see it and where you've lived and how you've lived and who you are, you're going to see something different in that art based on you. So it brings out your truth. So when someone tells you about art, they're telling you about themselves. And that is what's so beautiful about art.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. So there's so many things that you said there that I can touch on. So first of all, talking about, you can almost put intangible drivers on art as well.
Yeah,
and
I probably could.
Like, so I had a conversation recently with Jonathan, and Jonathan Fries, obviously,
Yes.
as well. Great guy, also compassion.
Yes, he is.
And we were talking actually about Italy, strangely enough.
Well, there you go.
Then we were speaking about how to put an intangible driver on to a country.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And then while you can put it on a country, it's not like every person. It's not a blanket per person. It's a blanket per country, or state, or whatever it is that you're in. Now, if an intangible driver is truth, an artist's truth, so you've got the storytelling. Yep, it's almost like the intangible driver of you matches of that, and then that gives you your storytelling.
It absolutely does. I think your intangible driver, like I said, my wife's an exhorter, so she was exhorting. She saw this great awakening, this great spiritual awakening. The compassion person just felt the tragedy of it. So he saw a tragedy. And again, and the teacher saw teaching. So you're going to, so I think that each art can have a different intangible driver, but I think it's also going to change for the person. I think art might be server. It could be that it could just be any of them. Just throwing it out there, but that's a possibility. So because it can adapt to any person. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the levels of art, because there's high art all the way down to low art, and you can tell what tier the art is on based on the degree to which it requires more of you in order to tell the story. So high art requires the most of you, and low art requires the least. So an example of low art, I would say, would be something like movies and television. Why? Because the story is already told. You see the entire story, you know the entire arc, you see what the characters look like, what they sound like, you know what they feel. There's not a whole lot that you need to put into it. The story's already there. In fact, I would say if we were talking about a thought process scale, I would put movies and television at like 160. It doesn't require a lot of you. You can just drift along and watch. You can watch it without engaging a whole lot of your mind, but it also has broad appeal because, again, it doesn't require that much. So you can just sit there in front of the TV or in front of the movie and just, kind of veg out on it. But the thing about movies and TV shows, especially movies, is they aren't necessarily universally appealing, even though people universally like being able to not have to think too much. They can still be polarizing in that there's some movies you're not going to like, or some TV shows you're not going to like. And the reason you won't like them is because you don't see any of yourself there. If it's a movie about something that's unfamiliar to me, I'm not going to really gravitate towards it. Whereas on the other hand, if it's a really good movie that's more timeless, then you will gravitate towards it. I would say the next level up would be the written word and story form, like a novel. Now, with a novel, you still have the story there; it's still written out in detail, but you have to put some of yourself into it in order to see what the characters look like. They may be described to you, but they're going to look different to you based on people you've seen who look like that or similar to it, or other experiences you've had. It can describe what a sunset looks like in the novel, but you're going to take what you've seen from a sunset and you're going to put it there. So you're going to put more of yourself into it. A level up from that would be a spoken word story, because it's going to be a shorter form. It's not going to have anywhere near as much detail that you're going to have to fill in. For example, the story I just told about my wife and I in Italy, at the cathedral. Well, there's a lot you didn't that I didn't tell you that your mind was automatically filling in. Like I didn't tell you what the weather was like. So if you like sunny days, you probably had the weather sunny. If you prefer overcast or rainy, if that gives you comfort, then you might have had us the situation in a rainy day. You don't know what the people look like. So you in your mind pictured the guy who was compassionate in a certain way that probably looked nothing like the actual guy, and the lady who was a teacher. You look at her a certain way, and you have to bring that to it. And my wife, you may have to wonder, if you haven't seen my wife, well, what does a woman who would marry this guy look like? So you have to bring your opinions and your own story to the story that I just told. You're going to see things in a completely different way based on you. So I would say the next level up from that would be poetry and songs with words, because now you're getting even less story. You're getting metaphor and allegory. And for example, let's say it's a story, a song about heartbreak, and they'll say a line like, my heart was in the deep dark pit, all alone. Well, obviously their heart wasn't physically in a pit somewhere. That would be fatal. But you know what that means. You're going to take any heartbreak you've had in your life, and of course we've all had our hearts broken, and you're going to relate to that song or that piece of poetry based on your uniqueness. And it's more timeless. As we go up higher, it becomes more and more timeless. An example just happened last night. My wife and I were getting ready for bed, and she put on some music to kind of relax and get ready to go to sleep. And what came on was a song that she and I would listen to back when we were dating years ago. And she was just loving the song. She said, you know what? I haven't heard this song in years, but I know all the lyrics, I know the feelings. And that's because a song is more timeless, because it, again, requires us. So when she was listening to that song, she was thinking back about our dating life and how we fell in love and all that stuff. So that's the next level. And then the highest level of art, I would say, is visual art and symphonies. Why? Because you have no words. All you have are the feelings that you bring to it. You have to fill in all the blanks. When you listen to a symphony by Beethoven or by Brahms or Bach or Mozart, you are bringing whatever you already have to that, because it could be triumph if that's where your life is. If you can listen to the same song later, say the same symphony later, and it could be tragic, or it could be heroic. It can inspire you, or it can make you feel lower. When you look at the artwork, you can be inspired to greatness. You can see a tragedy there. You can see a spiritual thing. You can just be in awe of it spiritually, like when we were in the Sistine Chapel, and we were just blown away by it. Or you could see it as a discovery, and a journey of discovery, where you're discovering more and more about who you are. So one final thing I'll say about this is I think you can judge a society by the type of art they gravitate towards. So I think the lower the art they gravitate towards, I think that says a lot about the actual civilization, the actual culture that you're in.
Yeah. And now, while you've just led me into where I was hoping I was going to get taken to, so it was perfect. I want to go back to the music that you were speaking about, okay? Because music's very important to a lot of people, okay? Probably everybody that can hear it, okay?
Yep.
They've all got their own take on it. They've all got their own, but they've also got their own memory and all these things that are attached, just like you just spoke about with your wife.
Right.
Attachments to either happy or sad. Now, if I could ask you, what do you believe in terms of scale-wise, how much music has changed in the last 2 or 3 decades?
I think it's changed a great deal, which we'll probably get to my final point, but I'll let you get back to it. But I think it's changed a great deal in that I think it is less artistic. I think it is less poetic. And I think it's intentional in some ways. And I'll talk about that when we get to what I believe is the opposite of art, or the anti-art. But I absolutely believe that not only music, but I think you can look at a lot of different art forms, and you can see them moving away from high art, not even to low art, but to non-art. And we'll talk about what non-art is. But I definitely see things moving that way. And you can also see the effect that it's having on our society. I mentioned before that every society, every culture, from the beginning of man's history on this earth all the way up to this day, stories are always a part of every culture. The oral tradition, every culture has that. But the higher the art, the more timeless it is, the more you can go back to it and experience it again. Whereas with a movie, we're in a time of COVID right now. And my wife and I, we've been binge watching shows on TV like most people. And we've seen some really good shows we've really enjoyed. But I will tell you, 10 years from now, I'm not going to want to watch that show again. I probably won't want to watch it again next week. But I can always go back to high art and still get inspired by the work of Michelangelo, of the work of Mozart and Beethoven. That will always inspire me because that's timeless. Why? Because there's more of me in it. There's more of you in that high art. And that's why it's timeless. And that's why when you get to lower forms of art, no one's going to remember some of the songs of today, 100 years from now, the way they would a great symphony or a great work of art.
Get that, and I feel the exact same. And I really feel that music has changed a lot, and the way that people are allowed to express themselves to music as well. You know, if you look at the culture within, I don't know what it's like over in the States, but in the UK, everything is about when we go out, we now sit down in the clubs. We don't get up and dance the same as we used to express ourselves and move. And is that because the society's changing as things moving on? It's changing the music, it's changing the people, and they're not allowed to express themselves. So it could be that the music's not got the same symphony, that it's not got the same expression, so that people don't want to express themselves the same. You know? And if we go into it without going kind of tinfoil hat wearing as you and I can sometimes do, it's I'm not sure it would be maybe a program, but it's definitely happening within our society. You know, I mean, I was a massive fan of, and I still am to this day, Fleetwood Mac. I love Fleetwood Mac. I love their music. I love the way that they bring everything together. The way that some of the singing and the backup singing of the men, even over Stevie Nicks' voice, they do some crazy stuff. And it's not like a normal sound. And it's not like where people, you couldn't have a track with that on it. It has to come in at a certain point. And I felt that they were so artistic and ahead of their game. We just don't seem to have that nowadays. And that's where I don't get that people are still, what we listen to allows us to express the same. But if we're not listening to things as expressive, we're going to get in the habit of not being in that place of being expressive.
Well, the bottom line is, Colin, it's going to be less of you in it. You're going to, because there's less of you, there's going to be less uniqueness. And that's really what art is all about, is bringing forth your uniqueness and your truth. So that's how you can tell good art from bad art, is again, on that scale of how much of your uniqueness is involved in it. How much do you have to put of yourself into it? And again, with movies and TV, it's very low because wide appeal, because it doesn't require much of you. Going to a gallery and looking at the art and crafting an entire story, that requires more of you. So it's more difficult. So fewer people are going to do it, but that is how you get into flow. That is the kind of art that allows you to flow, because you have to be at 80. I think, again, if the movies are at 160 and TV shows are 160, I think that as you get up, I think it's novels, you're at 80 because you have to focus more. But then when you get to high art, you can flow because you're toggling between what your conscious mind sees and what your unconscious sees, because high art is more focused on the unconscious, and lower art is more focused on the conscious.
Yeah, that's the more the kind of the tangible things, you know, the things that we can touch, talking to the conscious in the moment. It's like materialistic almost. And then going back into how you feel into it as well. And it's literally amazing. Now, you touched on something there which I was very interested in listening to, because obviously you and I do the same as John and Jonathan. We talk and we just talk. We don't literally script anything. But you talked about non-art.
Yes.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask you, but it was very interesting because it piqued my interest on it.
Yeah, I think it's important because we need to know the antithesis of art so that we can recognize it. And what will be the antithesis? Well, we'll just look at the positives of art. Art is about it's about bringing about more of you and bringing more of your uniqueness and what you bring to it. So the opposite of that would be less. It would be a form of expression that wants less of you, that does not want your uniqueness, that wants you to be like everyone else. And John mentioned in the last video with you that the opposite of art, the anti-art, is propaganda. Propaganda is not about uniqueness and truth. It's about conformity and lies. And we know examples of big examples of propaganda, like the government is really good at propaganda. If you go to the wartime, you go to a museum about World War II and you'll see the propaganda art of the Nazis where they would depict Jewish people and as subhuman, or well, anyone who is non-Aryan as subhuman. And you're supposed to think that the Jews are the enemy. They have to be, everyone has to think this way. And you're not allowed to say, well, wait a minute, I know a Jewish family and they're good people. You're not allowed to have that unique take. You can only think what they want you to think.
Yep.
Now, the Allies did the same thing. They had bad depictions of the Japanese and of the Germans, but with the idea that this is the enemy, everyone has to think this way. And that's what it's all about. But here's the thing with propaganda is that it has a very, very tight, narrow appeal. Propaganda really only appeals to people who are fanatics, who have the 320 destructive process. However, they want it to appeal widely, but the only way to do that is through force. Propaganda is always done through force, be it military force, or it could be through intimidation. Politics is a great example of that. When you look at political TV, there's no story there. That's why it's not art. There's no story. There's no story in propaganda. There's no story in political news programs. You think this. This is what you think. Anyone who doesn't think this is evil or stupid. If you are a conservative, liberals are evil and stupid. If you're a liberal, conservatives are evil and stupid. There's no nuance. You can't be like liberal on social issues and conservative on financial issues. You got to be one or the other. We don't want your uniqueness. So the question is why? What is the point of propaganda? It's about control. It's about a system of control. And the reason that people who operate a system of control want to stamp down uniqueness is because the people at the top are the only ones who are allowed to be great. They're the only ones who are allowed to excel. Everyone else has to be at the bottom and they can't be unique. Why? Because every one of us, Colin, has the ability to be great. We all have greatness within us, but we only experience that greatness through our uniqueness, because there is no one on earth like Colin Stevenson. There is no one on earth like Ed Mabry. There's no one on earth like everyone watching right now. Every one of you, you are unique. You bring something to the world that no one else can, and that makes you great. But that also makes you a threat to anyone who is at the top of a system of control, because only they can be great. So how do you stop greatness? You bring down uniqueness. You have conformity. You turn people into robots. You make them want to, you want them to think the exact same thing and conform. And that's why they use art in a bad way. You talked about music. I think that one of the ways they're doing that with music is by making all the music sound. Have you noticed that music sounds the same? You have the same type of music, the same themes in music. And you have to, and they want you to enjoy, everyone has to enjoy the same type of music. And if you don't like this particular artist, who may not even be talented, I look at some of the artists now, and granted, I'm a little older, and so I think the older you get, the less you care about pop music, but I look at some of the artists, and this person has no talent. They are not good, yet everyone tells you this is a great artist. This girl or guy, whoever, is the latest hot thing. And I'm like, but I don't like their songs. Doesn't matter. We all have to think the same thing. And that's what it's all about. And it can be even in the form of, let's say, in a political type agenda. And you can take an agenda and make it part of propaganda. I'll give you one last example from one of my favorite movie series that we talked about the last time we were together, and that's the Star Wars series. Grew up with it as a kid, favorite movie series, love it. However, a few years ago, Star Wars was bought by Disney, and the person who was running Star Wars for Disney, later, I think her name is Kathleen Kennedy, she decided that she didn't just want to tell a story, she wanted to put forward an agenda. And her agenda was female empowerment and the destruction of the patriarchy, whatever you want to think about that. So she mandated that in the series of films that just came out, the last 3 films, that it has to have a female protagonist. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having female protagonists. But she also wanted to make sure, but when you demand it, now you're taking away the freedom of the artist. The artist is no longer free to do what they want to do. They have to conform to this. And they wanted this character to be better than the original hero of Star Wars, who was Luke Skywalker. Now, Luke Skywalker was a guy, he started out, he was hero's journey, classic hero's journey. He starts off as a nobody, he discovers there's power within him, he learns and grows. And by the end of the final movie in the original trilogy, he had become a master of his power, and he defeated the enemy, he was a hero. Well, what they did with this character, I think her name was Rey, they want to make her better than Luke. So they decided to make her all powerful immediately. Like from the beginning of the movie, she just has all the power. She's able to do things in the first movie that Luke can only do at the end of the 3rd movie. The problem with that is she doesn't grow. She has no room to grow. She's already completely established. And people did not like the character because she has no story arc. There is no growth. She doesn't become anything better. She's as powerful at the beginning as she is at the end, and no one can relate to that because we all grow and struggle. She was a terrible character. So that brings about my point, which is how can you tell propaganda from art? The story. Is it satisfying? Does it fit any of the story arcs? The girl in the Star Wars movie, she didn't fit any of the story arcs. She wasn't a hero because she never grew. She had no journey of discovery. There was no tragedy. She was always perfect. No one could relate to it. It was a bad story. It was propaganda in order to push forward a certain agenda. So we have to be careful about that. But that's how we can tell, because great art is timeless. I'm betting 10 years from now, no one's going to care about these movies because they're not timeless, because there's no story there.
Yeah. And, right, okay. So when you were talking to me, you spoke about the television program. Now, I want to talk about one. I'm not a fan of watching television. I haven't done for a few years, to be honest. But when I did, and what I will watch from time to time was Friends. Yeah. Right? Okay. It is meaningless. It is pointless. It is not going to change your life in any way by watching it. But again, it's something that you can flake out in front of the television and just view without having to worry. You know, you're not having to put any of you into it. The entertainment's there. It's funny. It's tongue-in-cheek. Right. But I believe that's timeless, because what they did was they put a combination of characters together to create one big picture. And if one of those characters were to be taken away, it would no longer be Friends. And every time you took a character away, if you can imagine the letters Friends, I know there's more in the word Friends, right? If you can imagine the letters Friends, and every time you took a character away, it took one letter away from the title of the program. I believe that's what it would do, and that's why I believe that would be timeless. And again, I will go back to I wouldn't go through binge watching, because my own thing, I like to watch a little bit so that I then feel free myself to be able to go and do something else. Because what I used to do is I used to watch it and I keep watching because I didn't want to miss the next and miss the next and miss the next. And it stopped me from actually doing things. So Friends, I believe, is timeless. And I believe what they did was very, very clever. It was something, every intangible driver was different. Every person was different. So that doesn't matter who's watching it, could get some sort of connection with it.
Right. And that is, again, that is the measure of how good the art is, or how high it is. It's how much of yourself is in it. You mentioned Friends because it has all the intangible drivers. I never thought about them. I'm sure if I looked at those characters again, I would probably see each one of those drivers. But you can look at a painting like the Mona Lisa, which has been around forever, and people still are fascinated with it. Why? Because it's going to be different. That little smile can mean something different to you, depending on who you are. Is it a smile? Is it a smile of joy? Is it a smile of seduction? Is she smiling because she's in pain? Is it more of a grimace than a happy smile? We don't know that, but it's going to depend on you and where you are in your life. That's why you can look at it 100 times and it will be different to you. It'll still be fresh to you, because that's what great stories are all about. And again, on the negative side, the stories that do not provide, any art that does not provide a good story, that is not satisfying, it's only going to appeal to you very narrowly, and it's only there to push an agenda, and that agenda is, unfortunately, is of conformity, that we all have to like this certain thing, and yeah, that's anti-art.
Well, in our schools, in our high schools, which will be you still got high school, you've got kind of kindergarten and high school, isn't it? Yeah. What they're doing in their high school, or our high school, they've actually stopped music classes in Scotland. Now, everyone thought that's fine. It came over the news, over the news channels, and nobody said anything. And when I turned around and I said to people, do you know kids can now not express themselves and learn how to express themselves because they've got no music? Art has not been banned, they just do it less, but music has been stopped. Now, this to me, again, is that what you're talking about the agenda, about making people do the same thing, you know, not allowing them to express themselves and be different. So it makes complete sense to what's happening and what I've seen happening, to exactly what you're saying. But the reason behind it, we don't know.
Well, I just know that every totalitarian style system, every system of control always destroys high art. They never want it around because they don't want people bringing that uniqueness out. And that's what, you talk about, that's what John talks about is being uniquely you, being more of who you are. And great art makes you more of who you are, and bad art makes you less. So I think that now that you know this, everyone watching, now you know the difference. So stay away from bad art and gravitate towards the good art, even though it's gonna require more effort. But take the time to appreciate a good symphony, paintings, um, novels, plays. TV and movies not so much, but you really want to gravitate towards the higher arts because that is going to make you see your truth and help you get to know who you are better, to make you, more uniqueness. And again, that's going to lead to your personal greatness because we need to live in a world of 7 billion great people as opposed to a world of a few great people and a bunch of other robots. We don't want that.
Yeah. And I just want to, I know we've not got much to kind of, we've got a little bit to talk about, but I want to touch on something. When I was in the army, right, just what you're talking about the control and about everything, I used to come home on leave. Now, I was fortunate enough to be very close. I was about 2.5 hours drive from my base to where I lived, right? Or where I stayed when I was on leave or whatever. Yeah. Because I had so much control in there and I wasn't able to be free and I wasn't able to express myself, I actually found myself take up listening to classical music, and I was never a fan of it before. And when I found, and I wasn't a fan, I just never listened to it. I'd heard it, but I didn't listen, if that makes sense. So I wasn't looking at the art form. I was looking at it doesn't have any tangible things for me and I'm not interested. I actually started listening to this when I was in my room, and I actually started listening to it on the way home on the drive. And because there was nothing there, all I could have was the beauty. And some of the symphonies were so good that I was able to create a picture story in my head from music with absolutely no words. And, sometimes you hear the pitter patter with cymbals, and you can imagine little animals creeping about, or, the big crescendo, and that was the big wolf coming to get the little animal. And I would really start to put, and I was like, wow, there's so much more to the world than. And this was almost at a time where I was coming into my own uniqueness without coming into it, if that makes sense. Yes. I was really kind of starting to feel more and understand more. And that's where I saw the art in it rather than listen to what it sounded like and try and relate my life to the music. I related the music to my life, and it opened my eyes so much.
Yep, that's it. That was a perfect example of what high art can do and why we need it so badly. And why we need to, to continue to fight to have it and to appreciate it and to teach our kids to appreciate it. And that's, you pretty much encapsulated it.
Yeah. And what we do is, I think the stigma attached to art doesn't help. So people think to be into art, they think it's high class. You talk about high art, which is high art because it takes more of us. Right. So people with low self-esteem wouldn't want to go and look at a piece of art because they wouldn't be able to feel, because they're scared of that. Yeah. They wouldn't maybe want to go and sit and listen to an orchestra in a kind of well-to-do building because they might not have been brought up that way. So they'll never put themselves in the way to express it. And I find it's almost tragic that we've put the class system into that people are scared to express themselves or to allow themselves to open up to more expression. And I, again, would like anyone that's watching to understand, go and try these things. Try going to an orchestra and watch an orchestra. Try and going to, listen to somebody classically singing in a place where you believe is out of your league when it's not. Go to the fine art place. It doesn't matter if you don't talk as in big words as the rest of the people there. You're there to express you, and it's very, very important.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I never attached the self-esteem aspect to it, but you're right. I think if you don't have high self-esteem, you don't want more of you out. So I think that's another great measure of where your self-esteem is how you relate to high art. And but that's another reason to learn more about your uniqueness and about the value and the greatness that you bring. And once you embrace your own personal greatness, then the symphonies, the high art, painting, sculptures are really going to come alive. Because I think the higher your self-esteem, the easier time you will have bringing your story to the art. Yeah, that was a great point.
And it's the exact same, again, going back into the way that we speak to people. The higher your self-esteem, the better you'll want to see in that other person. So to wrap this up, everything is art, but it's how much we want to put in that we are going to see out, regardless whether it's a symphony, whether it's a person, whether it's a visual picture, a painting, whatever we put in, we put out. And that will be the measure of our self-esteem to pick it. And if you can't relate to that, maybe it's not the art that should change, it's the way that you feel about yourself, to be able to open up to understand it a bit better.
I'm with you. Absolutely.
Nice. Love that. So listen, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for coming on and give us your feelings, because I love listening to the way that you zoom in on things and break them down to so tiny pieces that people don't get to see. And I actually I'll tell you this as well before we go, every time I speak to you, I surprise myself, because it's like you open something within me that allows me to go deeper than I normally would or can see. It's like you've got little keys to little doors in my brain, and it allows me to make realizations in real time, and it's great.
Yeah, well, that's why big picture and small picture people need each other. I need guys like you and John to kind of show me more than what I'm seeing, and you guys need me to bring some resolution, high resolution to some of the parts of the stuff.
So we also need people to understand if they're big picture and small picture, and come together with the opposite as well. That'll allow them to see a different size of pictures anyway. Anyway, thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
So do I, Colin. Great seeing you again, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.